Hi, I'm Duncan Kerber, memoir editor and founder of the Memoir Workshop course and coaching program. Welcome to the Memoir Workshop podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be welcoming Christi Christians, author of the unforgettable memoir Wager on Forever, a memoir of my life in a modern day cult. The book is available on Amazon now. Christie's book tells the story of 30 years, yes, 30 years inside a cult that promised she could live forever. The book looks at how she was drawn in, why she stayed so long, what she lost in her personal life, and how she broke free and healed. I'm really excited to get into all of these topics today with Christi. So, Christi, welcome to the Memoir Workshop podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, before we get into your 30 years in the cult, can you tell our viewers a bit about what you were doing before you joined? You had a family, you had kids, you were married. Tell us a bit about that.
That's right. Yes, I was living in Belgium near Brussels with my husband and four sons. So from the outside, it looked like a regular, nice family. But I was searching in my life. I never totally fit in with mainstream society. And I was a seeker. I was always looking, there must be something more to life. And that's the ideal place for a person to get sucked into a cult.
And in your book, one of the early scenes is about how you started in the cult. Someone showed up at your door. How did that spark begin?
Yeah, well, it began with a friend that knocked on my door and said, well, tomorrow night I was invited with another friend. She just came back from the United States and she has some exciting stories to tell. And she said I could bring someone because I didn't know that lady. I said, okay, he convinced me and I went with him. And then I met this lady in her house and she was all over excited about three people that she met in Scottsdale, Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona. And she was just so excited. And I was like, oh, this is really out of the box. But I wasn't too afraid about things that were out of the box. But yet it was a lot. So she told me that those people said they were living forever, not in some other world, but here in this world, on this planet. Of course, I thought that was really weird. But and so when I came home and I told my husband, he was like very skeptical, of course. And then in the next day, she called me and she said, well, these three people, they are on a tour in Europe and they're coming to Munich. Do you want to go with me? And I thought, yeah, why not? I can learn something new and see what's going out there in the world. And then I went with her to Munich.
Now, I don't know much about cults, just from what I've seen on TV, fictionalized cults. They seem like shadowy groups living on farms, pulling people in, never to be seen again. It's a very stereotypical view of cults. But early in your book, you describe a cult meeting in Munich, Germany, and there's a large crowd, a stage, these glamorous leaders, well dressed, well spoken. They're very entertaining. To me, it seemed like a self help group, almost like a Tony Robbins kind of thing. So, what drew you in? What did you like about these people?
Yes, what you say is right on. They did not look like a cult, or at least like the idea that I had of a cult. They looked more like motivational speakers. That they were very well spoken and very entertaining, and they looked like they had life all figured out. They were so certain of themselves. And life is intrinsically uncertain. And I was in a period in my life, as I said, that I was searching. And I wasn't certain of anything at that moment. You could almost call it like a midlife crisis. I was 40 at that time. And they just drew me in by all the stories that they told and how they, because cult leaders, of course, I didn't know that at that time. I know it now, but they are very charismatic and they know how to draw people into their story. So I was totally captivated by them. Not so much the message also appealed to me. Hey, living forever, why not? But it was mainly the leaders, their charisma, and how they presented themselves. That was what.
And then you started going to meetings around the world. You went to Israel. There's a great scene of you living it up in Israel with the fellow members. Then you had local meetings in Belgium. It seemed really fun, exciting.
It was, yeah, it was for me too. So when you join, you do not join a cult. Nobody joins a cult. It's only later that the group becomes more and more demanding. And it's also later that they reveal themselves as a cult. But you join a great group, with like-minded people, and everything is exciting in the beginning. You get that feeling that you belong somewhere, which we all desired, because that is innate for human beings to desire to belong somewhere and to connect people.
Then after a few years, they invite you to come live in Arizona, in the United States. Seems like a really big jump for a woman from Belgium. What was promised? What was the selling point from the cult?
Well, the selling point there was when you come and live with us, where their headquarters of the cult was, here in Phoenix, Arizona, then you live with all these like-minded people, and they convinced us that in order to make physical immortality, that was what the cult was about, that was their ideology, we need each other. We need to constantly support each other to make that a reality. And they depicted his life in Phoenix, Arizona as like really the best life in the world that you could have. But it took me 10 years because I met him in 89 and I moved to Phoenix in 99. But those 10 years, I traveled around because they gave their events around the world. And I traveled around the world. And each time they promoted for us to come to Phoenix, Arizona. But of course, it took me 10 years because I needed to wait until the children were older and I just couldn't leave and I just didn't want to. But then after 10 years, I got more and more indoctrinated by them, and it seemed more and more fantastic to make this journey to Phoenix. And then I did it.
And you were in the cult in Phoenix for how many more years? 20 years?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I moved in Phoenix, then I was still for 20 years in the
Wow.
cult. So altogether, it was 30 years. Of course, once I moved here, it started to get more intense.
And so when you got to Arizona, what were the demands that they started putting on you? And what kind of support did you have to provide to them?
Well, mostly in a cult, it's all about serving the leaders.
Mm.
And now there was also support for me because I came to a country, where I didn't know anything. And so then you come to a group of people, and that was very supportive for me too. But the cult leaders, they like to have all the attention. They like to be worshipped. and you want to please them because you want to be a good member of the group. That's also something that is innate in us. We like to be valued. We like to be needed. And so we then do our best to really please the leaders and to live how they want us to live. They give all these guidelines. So in the beginning, there was also benefits for me because I thought I had found a group of people where I could belong to that gave me purpose, gave me meaning.
You also get into what you lost in your personal life by joining this cult. Your husband, he was a skeptic right from the start. There's an interesting dynamic when you go to Arizona and he's still back in Belgium. You're losing your husband. But strangely enough, your son Dominic, he's already in Arizona in the cult before you.
Yes, yes. And that was because I talked about it to him. And then he was about 20, something like that. So a young person looking for their place in the world. And every year I came to Phoenix during those 10 years, I came to Phoenix, Arizona, because there was a big meeting, a yearly meeting. And I said, well, you can come with me and check it out. So he came with me. And then, of course, there they were again motivating people to move here. And he had not much to lose. And so he moved here before me.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
before me.
Did Dominic actually stay in the cult? He's
Yes,
still in it?
he's still in it
He's
today.
still in it. Okay. So you were able to break free. You were able to
Mhm.
heal and get out of it. He's still in it. Wow. Now I want to turn to the latter part of the book when you start to have some doubts. How did you start realizing this was a cult and how did you break free of it?
Now, this is a long process. And that process is even harder and longer than how you get into it. So, first, they say something that you think is kind of weird and you don't like it. And you think, oh, that's strange. But then you think, oh, but they said so many great things, and they're such great people. So you put it in the background somewhere and you think, oh, that is just, and you never think about it. And then maybe a year later, that happens again, that they say something that you think, wow, this is over the top. But what you learn when you're in a cult, you learn to censor yourself. You learn to, oh, no, that's okay. It's okay. Because everything what the leaders do is fine. It's okay. So it took me when I started first doubting and suppressing my doubts, that took a few years. And then I started really doubting, and even in the background had this idea that I wanted to leave. But then it still took me about 6 years or so before I actually left. And one main reason for that was also the fact that my son was there. Because when you bring people in, then it's much harder to lead because you feel responsible for them, that they're there.
On the point about immortality, which was the promise of this cult, I've noticed a recent rise in a movement called Don't Die. So our viewers may know about a guy named Brian Johnson, and he has a big business about supplements and treatments. And he has a popular Netflix documentary right now called Don't Die. And he uses these vitamins and treatments and health science to try to extend his life, to make his body better and potentially live forever. But the cult that you talk about in your book, it's not a health or science cult. It's not based on extending life through, medical procedures. I can see how Brian Johnson tries to use science to avoid death, but I don't see that in this cult. So, do you want to talk a bit about that comparison?
Yes. Well, in the beginning, there were three leaders in the cult, and one was the founder. He started it already in the 60s, 70s, somewhere. And he was a minister. So, in fact, it came out of religion. But he said that in the Bible, so he knew the Bible very well, that there was evidence in the Bible that physical immortality was possible. So that's what he said. And it was all about being alive and about the connection with each other. He called it cellular connection. So, and it was, the people were all very alive and very affectionate, all loving each other. And it it did something to me. It woke something up in me, a desire to live and to be alive fully.
Hmm.
So that's what it did to me.
I like the phrase you use there, a cellular connection. To me, it sounds pseudoscientific, part religious. And I imagine that if you were hanging out with these energetic, positive people all the time, it can make your body feel good, but not make you live forever. That just seems unbelievable. So I'm sure people will ask you, how could you have believed this?
And I totally understand that. I totally understand when you're in, oh my gosh, how is it possible? But you need to know that that is because people are logic, right? And logically, it doesn't seem possible. But we that were in the cult, we were indoctrinated step by step by step. And they indoctrinate the logic out of you. So for us, logic, even though I could think logically about other aspects of my life, I ran a business all the time when I was there in Phoenix. So I could think logically to run a business and all that and to do the normal things in life. But just about the ideology of the cult, the logic is indoctrinated out of you. I have to say, when the first leader died, they started to change their ideology.
One thing I noticed in the book was a change in tone from the leaders later on in your time in the cult. Early on, the leaders are encouraging and fun and nice. And then later, they're more negative, they're more strict with you. They must have had a sense that you were wavering or drifting away.
Yeah, so at the end, yeah, at the end, they get a sense. They are very sensitive and they know their people.
Hmm. Now I'm a memoir editor, so I have to ask, when did you think about writing this memoir?
Yeah, well, when I just came out of the cult, I started to write intuitively. I wrote to get all these emotions that I had, these overwhelming emotions on the page, like self blame, regret, anger. I was overwhelmed with all these feelings. And the best thing I know how to do at that time was writing it down. And then I just, for some reason, some magical reason, I kept writing. I couldn't stop. And in that process, I think, oh, maybe this could become a book. But, I had no idea to write a book, but that was the beginning. And then, of course, I needed help. And I worked in a small group of writers with a coach to organize everything, to even to make a book out of all my vomits that I did on the page, because that's how we call it, right? A
Yeah.
vomit draft. So And then I started to spend more and more time and really had the desire to make a book for other people to read and to learn from.
So, what were the biggest challenges of writing this memoir? Did you have any memory problems or just trying to get words down on the page?
No, my biggest challenge was looking deep at everything what happened. And I also, together with writing, I also did research on cult dynamics, on the control and coercion that happens in cults. And there were things that while you are in the cult, you don't see it. You don't have to look at it because if they praised us for something, then was because we were with them. Being with them was the best thing you could do in the world. And so you don't even look at what you did. But then when you come out, then it's like, oh, whoa, what I all did. So I needed to face that. But writing helped me with that. It helped me because I had to look at it and I had to feel it because those feelings were suppressed all these years. And it was very healing for me to dare to feel it, dare to face what I did, and let all these feelings flow and run through me. That was the healing process. But it wasn't always easy. It was sometimes really tough. That was kind of the hardest part, but the best part too for myself.
I know that writing out one's experiences is a healing process. So, research shows that cancer patients doing what's called expressive writing, so that's getting their experiences and ideas out on the page, no holding back or anything like that, they have more positive health outcomes. So, now with your book out, do you feel that this is kind of the end of a chapter, a good resolution to all of this?
Yes, it is. It is because just before the book came out, I was like, oh, is that really going out to the world? The people that I know are now going to know what I did. But I got over this. I got over this. I reminded myself that's what I wanted to do. And now I am very happy that I did it. And yes, it is like a peace. It is like a peace of mind to have it out, to tell my story, because I think those stories need to be told, because people need to be aware of those dynamics so that they can recognize them.
Now, beyond telling us these really fascinating stories of 30 years in a cult, what's the overall purpose of the book, you think?
So I came out of the cult, I was very depressed and overwhelmed. And then I also did some therapy. I also talked to former members. And I came out of this really well. Like I started a new life. And that is something that I want to bring to people, whatever age you are. I was 70 when I came out of the cult. And whatever your challenges were, because everybody has challenges, we can overcome them and start a new life. And I show in my book how I do that and that is possible. And for me, that is also something that I wanted to bring to the reader.
That's a great message, great purpose that readers can gain from the book beyond just the insights into cults.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Christy. That was great. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Christi Christians, her book, Wager on Forever, a memoir of my life in a modern day cult, is now available on Amazon.
Thank you.